A young black girl steps into the gleaming jewelry store, her gaze catching on the elegant displays of diamond rings, delicate bracelets, and sparkling necklaces. She moves confidently, examining each piece with a familiarity that most customers don't show. Her presence is poised, almost as if this place is second nature to her. She glides through the displays with quiet curiosity, unaware that someone is watching her with a critical eye. Standing behind the counter, a saleswoman narrows her gaze, her lips pressing into a thin line as she observes every move, her suspicion intensifying with each passing second. "Can I help you with something?" The saleswoman's voice cuts through the quiet murmur of the store, the politeness forced, almost harsh. The young girl looks up, surprised by the sharpness in the tone. She shakes her head gently, offering a polite smile, but the saleswoman's eyes remain cold. "Are you sure?" the woman presses, her voice laced with a barely concealed accusation. "Because I've been watching you walk around, and, well, I'd hate to think there's something you're here for besides shopping." The girl's smile fades slightly, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face as she glances around. "I'm just looking, thanks." But the woman's stare doesn't soften. She steps from behind the counter, her heels clicking against the tiled floor as she approaches with a purpose. "I'm sorry, but I've got to ask, do you actually intend to buy something, or are you just here to waste time?" The girl blinks, her expression turning from polite curiosity to something far more vulnerable. "I told you, I'm just looking." "Looking?" The saleswoman scoffs, folding her arms across her chest. "Or maybe looking for something to slip into your pocket when no one's watching." At that, the girl freezes. Her hands, which had been brushing gently over the glass display, drop to her sides. Her face floods with color, and she stares at the woman, a mixture of shock and hurt flashing in her eyes. "I'm not here to steal anything." "Really?" The woman's voice is cold, unyielding, dripping with doubt. "Because I've seen people like you come in here before. They say they're just looking and then they disappear with something that doesn't belong to them. So, let's make this easy for both of us. I think it's best if you leave." The girl stands there, stunned into silence. Every eye in the store turns towards them, and she can feel the weight of their gazes, the unspoken judgments. Her heart pounds painfully in her chest, her cheeks burning with shame as if every word, every glance, is branding her with an invisible scar. She fights back the sting of tears, her pride keeping her standing, but it's a struggle. "Excuse me." Her voice is low, barely audible, but there's a tremor of indignation buried beneath the humiliation. "I'm not a thief. I'm here just like any other customer." "Customers don't just wander around," the woman retorts, her eyes sweeping up and down in a way that leaves little doubt about her bias. "Especially not, well, ones like you. So, unless you can actually afford to buy something," but she doesn't get the chance to finish her sentence. The young girl, breathing hard, grips her purse tighter, her nails digging into her skin as she fights the frustration, the injustice, burning inside her. For a second, she considers leaving, sparing herself the indignity of standing here under such scrutiny. Yet something keeps her rooted to the spot, something strong and unyielding, refusing to let her walk away defeated. "I can afford anything in this store," she says quietly, her voice steadier now. But the saleswoman only laughs, an icy, dismissive sound that cuts deeper than words. "Oh, really?" she sneers. "Because you don't look like you can afford much of anything in here." The girl's jaw clenches, and for a moment, a flicker of anger rises in her, her gaze hardening. But instead of answering, she reaches into her purse, pulling out her phone. She dials a number, her hands trembling slightly as she brings the phone to her ear. The saleswoman watches with amusement, as if expecting some desperate ploy, but a glimmer of uncertainty sparks when the girl's expression shifts, a hint of defiance replacing the pain in her eyes. "Yes, I'm at the store," the girl says into the phone, her voice controlled, but there's an edge to it now, something that wasn't there before. "Could you come down?" The saleswoman rolls her eyes, muttering under her breath, "What, calling for backup now?" The girl ignores her, slipping her phone back into her purse and fixing her gaze on the woman, a quiet fire simmering beneath her calm exterior. The seconds tick by, the air in the store thick with tension, as the other customers exchange looks, whispers fluttering through the crowd like restless birds. Just then, the door swings open, and a tall figure steps into the store, dressed in an immaculate suit, his eyes scanning the room until they land on the young girl. His face softens, a warm smile breaking through his otherwise composed expression as he approaches her, but when he notices her tense posture, his gaze sharpens, flicking to the saleswoman with a steely glint. "What's going on here?" he asks, his voice calm but with an undertone of authority that makes the saleswoman shift uncomfortably. She opens her mouth, but the girl speaks first. "She thinks I'm here to steal," the girl says, her voice steady but low, as if she's holding back a flood of emotions. She holds the man's gaze, and something unsaid passes between them, an understanding deeper than words. The man's face hardens, and he turns to the saleswoman, his expression unreadable. "Did you accuse her of stealing?" The saleswoman laughs nervously, her confidence wavering as she takes a step back. "Sir, I didn't mean to imply anything, it's just that, well," she looked a bit suspicious. "Suspicious?" The man repeats the word slowly, his tone deadly calm. "This young lady? Why, exactly, did you find her suspicious?" "Well," the woman stammers, her eyes darting around the store, but there's no escape from his gaze. I mean, she didn't look like she belonged here." The man's expression hardens even more, and he takes a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "She doesn't belong here." The silence in the room is heavy, thick with a sense of anticipation, as everyone watches, breath held, waiting for what will come next. The saleswoman's confidence crumbles as the weight of her actions settles on her shoulders, the reality dawning that this situation is far from what she had assumed. "You do realize," the man says, his voice calm but each word laced with steel, "that this young lady has every right to be here. In fact, more right than you." The woman blinks, confusion and panic flickering in her eyes. What do you mean?" The man looks at her, his gaze piercing, and in that moment, the entire store seems to hold its breath, waiting for the revelation that's hanging in the air. The young girl stands tall beside him, her earlier vulnerability replaced with a quiet strength, as if the words about to be spoken will set everything right, expose the truth beneath the assumptions and prejudice. "She," the man says, his voice firm and clear, "is the daughter of the owner of this store." The words drop like a stone in water, rippling through the room, as the saleswoman's face drains of color, her hands dropping to her sides in disbelief. Murmurs sweep through the store, the realization dawning on the other customers, as a wave of shock and shame crashes over the woman. But I didn't know," she stammers, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought," the man's gaze doesn't soften. "You thought wrong. And now, I think we need to talk about your future here." The girl watches, a mixture of emotions swirling within her as the weight of the moment settles, a feeling of justice tempered with sadness. The humiliation, the hurt, every cutting word, all of it still lingers, but there's something else now, something stronger. A sense of vindication. The saleswoman stumbles, her voice shaking. Please don't," but the man is resolute, and the young girl stands beside him, her presence a quiet reminder of the strength it took to stand her ground, to not let the injustice pass without a fight. As the crowd watches, the tension mounting, one question lingers in the air, pressing on every mind: what will happen next? What consequences will she face for her actions? Before we dive into this story, we want to take a moment to support every Black viewer watching this video. Here at Plow of Twist, we stand firmly against any form of racism or discrimination. Our stories are meant to expose injustice and show the strength and resilience of those who overcome it. We hope this story resonates with you and reminds you that dignity and respect belong to everyone. Enjoy the story, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives. Thank you for being here, and let's get started. Inside the sprawling heart of the city, among the buzzing crowds and endless hum of car engines, stood one of the most elegant jewelry stores in the downtown district. This was Élysée Jewelers, an upscale place known for its fine gemstones and personalized designs, a store where each sparkling piece seemed more an art than just a luxury item. Its customers were often high-profile executives, politicians, and socialites who enjoyed spending without a second thought. The shop was sleek, with polished marble floors and large windows showcasing jewelry that seemed to glisten under the showroom lights. The air was crisp and almost too quiet, like a sacred space that demanded reverence. The store's elegance was matched by its attention to exclusivity, and no one took this standard more seriously than Claire, one of the senior saleswomen. Claire Evans, a woman in her mid-40s, took pride in her years of experience in high-end retail. Her demeanor was polished, her attire always immaculate, and she carried herself with an air of authority. She had seen countless faces walk through the glass doors, and her instincts, as she would boast to her colleagues, could spot a real buyer from a mile away. For Claire, real buyers came in a particular look and demeanor, an unspoken standard she had set, one rooted in her own assumptions and biases. She could be kind and charming to those who met her standards, but to others, her politeness turned icy, her warmth dissolving into thinly veiled disdain. For the last few years, Claire had watched the ebb and flow of customers with a critical eye. She had her regulars, well-dressed, familiar faces with a clear interest in Élysée luxury and exclusivity, and she gave them her best service. But she was far less patient with those who didn't fit the mold, especially anyone who appeared, in her eyes, to be out of place. Claire's silent judgments often dictated how she interacted with each person, a pattern that seemed harmless in her eyes but, to others, came across as unyielding prejudice. Into this polished world of sparkling gems and hushed transactions walked a young woman named Maya Anderson. At 19, Maya had an elegance and self-assuredness that was uncommon for her age. Her long, natural curls framed a face that carried a gentle curiosity, her dark eyes expressive and filled with a quiet strength. Despite her youth, she moved with a confidence that wasn't born of privilege, but rather of resilience. Maya had grown up in a world that required her to be alert, careful, and ever aware, a world that had not always treated her kindly but had shaped her into someone unafraid to claim her space. She was dressed modestly yet stylishly, with a casual sophistication that seemed to reflect her personality, humble yet undeniably aware of her worth. Today, Maya was there for a reason, although, to a casual observer, she may have just looked like someone browsing. She was familiar with the layout of the store, her gaze lingering on each piece with an attentive eye, as if taking note of every detail. To her, Élysée was not just another luxury store, it held a deeper connection, one she cherished, and her visits were always filled with a sense of pride mixed with the occasional twinge of nostalgia. There was a sense of belonging she felt here, one that had been nurtured over the years. Maya had a habit of taking her time, savoring the pieces as if each one was a part of her own story, a personal connection that was invisible to anyone else but powerful to her. As Maya strolled through the store, her calm confidence seemed to subtly unsettle Claire, who had been watching her closely. To Claire, Maya's presence was an anomaly. She didn't fit the typical profile of Élysée clientele, or so Claire assumed. There was no flashing of credit cards or the air of wealth that Claire so often associated with real buyers. In her mind, Maya was out of place, an oddity that raised her suspicion. And with that suspicion, Claire felt her patience wear thin, her internalized biases slowly hardening into open hostility. Maya paused in front of a particular diamond necklace, its soft glimmer casting tiny rainbows in the light. She leaned forward slightly, admiring the intricate craftsmanship, lost in thought. It was then that Claire decided to approach, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step measured, deliberate. Maya noticed Claire's approach and glanced up, her polite smile ready, but the expression she met was not one of welcome. "Can I help you with something?" Claire's tone was curt, the friendliness absent. Her gaze was scrutinizing, taking in Maya's appearance with a judgment that was barely concealed. Maya straightened, the smile faltering but still polite. "I'm just looking, thank you," she replied softly, a kindness in her tone that was met with nothing but Claire's cool stare. "Oh, just looking." Claire's voice carried a hint of mockery, an undertone that Maya couldn't ignore. The words weren't outright hostile, but there was an implication, a suggestion that her "just looking" was not welcome here. Maya's expression flickered, a subtle shift that Claire seemed to notice. Sensing a tension she had likely dealt with before, Maya let out a small breath, not wanting to react, to escalate. But Claire's persistence was unyielding. "Browsing is fine," Claire continued, her voice sharp, "but I've found that real buyers don't wander around like this." She folded her arms, her eyes narrowing as if Maya's mere presence was offensive. Maya's heart pounded, the sting of humiliation starting to settle in. She glanced around, aware of the other shoppers who had started to look her way, their curiosity mixing with judgment as Claire's words hung in the air. Maya took a steadying breath, fighting the urge to let anger take over. She wasn't going to allow herself to be pushed out, not by someone who didn't know her, who didn't understand her right to be here. She looked Claire in the eye, her voice calm but firm. "I have every right to look, just like anyone else." But Claire only smirked, an eyebrow arching in feigned amusement. "Oh, of course," she replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "But if you're not going to buy anything, I suggest you make your way out. We have policies, after all." "Policies?" Maya's stomach twisted, her face flushing with a mix of anger and shame. She was painfully aware of the silent stares, the whispers of customers and staff alike. For a moment, she considered walking out, sparing herself from the humiliation. But something within her refused to yield. She wasn't going to let this woman dictate her actions, wasn't going to let prejudice push her out of a space that, in many ways, was hers to belong in. With quiet determination, Maya took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I don't think I need your permission to be here," she said, her voice calm yet edged with the strength of someone who had faced down unfairness before. Claire's eyes narrowed, her mouth setting in a thin line. "Well, I suggest you don't waste your time, or mine." The dismissive tone was unmistakable, each word carrying a weight that hung in the air, a judgment that struck deep. The tension grew thick, each second stretching as Maya held her ground, her expression unyielding. There was a quiet defiance in her stance, a silent declaration that she would not be dismissed so easily. But just as the standoff reached its peak, a voice cut through the thick silence. "Is there a problem here?" The voice was firm, calm, yet carried a quiet authority that demanded attention. Both Maya and Claire turned to see a man approaching, his gaze shifting between the two. He was tall, composed, with an air of quiet power. Though he didn't appear confrontational, his presence was commanding, enough to make Claire falter. "Oh, no problem at all," Claire replied quickly, her voice almost too sweet. "I was just assisting this customer." The man's gaze settled on Maya, his expression softening slightly as he took in her tense posture. And then he looked back at Claire, his gaze hardening, his silence saying more than words ever could. The silence was heavy, charged with something unspoken, as if this exchange held far more weight than Claire realized. Maya felt her heart slow, her hands relaxing at her sides as she sensed an unexpected ally. There was a shift in the room, a quiet shift in power that seemed to unnerve Claire. She took a step back, her confident facade wavering, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes as the man continued to regard her with an unwavering gaze. And as Maya looked at him, a small spark of hope ignited, a sense that, perhaps, justice might be on her side. As the tension settled between Maya and Claire, the man's presence was like a crack in the silent standoff, one that made Claire shift nervously on her feet. She straightened, smoothing her blouse as she searched for a way to regain her composure. The man's steady gaze unsettled her, and she quickly plastered on the polite smile she had mastered in years of customer service. "Maya," he said, his voice warm as he addressed her. She felt a small rush of relief, as though his simple acknowledgement was a validation she hadn't realized she needed. The tone of his voice was calm, reassuring, as though there was no need for raised voices to make a point. But beneath his calm exterior, Maya could sense the protective intensity that lay just under the surface. "Mr. Anderson," Claire interrupted with a nervous laugh, clearly eager to smooth over the situation. "I was just explaining our store policies to her, you see." "I didn't realize," he held up a hand, silencing her. "Claire, there's no need to explain. I heard enough." His eyes flicked to Maya with a reassuring look before he turned back to Claire, his expression cool and unreadable. "I think we need to have a conversation about those policies of yours." Claire's face paled as she stumbled to reply. "Sir, I just thought," she looked. She caught herself mid-sentence, realizing the direction her explanation was headed. But it was too late, her words hung in the air, revealing the implicit bias that had fueled her actions. Maya, standing silently beside him, felt her emotions swirl, part anger, part relief, and part sadness. She had expected to be treated with dignity in a place she had every right to be, and yet here she was, still processing the subtle and not-so-subtle injustices of the past few minutes. The memory of Claire's condescending words burned in her mind, a reminder of the way she'd been judged at first glance. Mr. Anderson's gaze stayed on Claire, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I need you to understand something, Claire. Maya is not just any customer. She's family here, whether or not you realize it." His tone was firm, each word laden with meaning that went beyond the surface. "Family?" Claire's eyes widened, a nervous chuckle escaping her lips. "Of course, sir, I just didn't realize she was connected to you." Mr. Anderson took a breath, his expression thoughtful as if he were considering his next words carefully. "Claire, this store has always prided itself on offering a welcoming atmosphere to every guest. If someone can't uphold that standard, perhaps they don't belong here." Claire's face turned a shade paler, her fingers twisting anxiously. "Sir, I understand. I just thought I was doing my job, protecting the store. You know how it is, sometimes we get people in here people like Maya," he interrupted, his voice laced with the quiet intensity that left no room for excuses. "Is that what you're trying to say?" Her mouth opened and closed, words failing her. Maya looked at her, feeling both satisfaction and frustration. The words hanging in the air were finally out in the open, unmasked and impossible to ignore. "Mr. Anderson," Claire tried again, her voice pleading. "I didn't mean anything by it. I would never," she trailed off, realizing she was digging herself deeper. Her gaze darted around the store, aware of the other employees watching, the customers who had begun to whisper, taking in the unusual scene unfolding before them. Maya took a small step forward, her heart pounding as she summoned the strength to speak. She didn't want to stay silent, not anymore. "You know, I've been coming to this store for years," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I've admired every piece in here, and I've respected everyone who works here. I thought this place was different." Claire opened her mouth to respond, but Mr. Anderson held up a hand again, stopping her. His gaze was on Maya, his eyes softened, the anger dimming as he focused on her. "Maya, I'm so sorry that you had to experience this," he said, his tone filled with a genuine regret that made her feel seen in a way Claire's words could never undo. But Maya wasn't finished. "It's not just about me. It's about every person who has to go through this, who's treated as if they don't belong somewhere just because someone like Claire decides they don't fit. I think it's time you realize that this isn't just about store policies." Mr. Anderson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're absolutely right, Maya. This isn't about policies, it's about people and the way we choose to treat each other." He turned to Claire, his expression hardening once more. "And I need people here who understand that. Who respect every single customer that walks through these doors." Claire's face fell, the reality of his words sinking in. She took a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Anderson, please. I didn't mean any harm. It was a mistake." "Mistakes like these come with consequences," he replied, his tone unyielding. "And right now, I'm questioning if you truly understand the values this store stands for." Maya felt a strange mix of vindication and sympathy watching Claire's reaction. As angry as she was, there was something sobering about seeing someone realize the impact of their actions. Claire's pride, once so evident, now appeared fractured as she struggled to process what this could mean for her future at Élysée Jewelers. In that tense silence, Maya finally spoke again. "It's not just about my experience, though. It's about everyone who's ever walked in here and felt unwelcome because someone like her thought they didn't belong." The other staff members, who had been standing back, observing with wary glances, seemed to straighten at Maya's words. Some of them nodded in silent agreement, acknowledging the truth she was speaking. This was more than just an isolated incident, it was a reflection of a culture that needed change. Mr. Anderson took a deep breath, his expression contemplative as he looked from Maya to Claire. "Maya, thank you for saying what needed to be said. And as for you, Claire," he continued, turning to her with a weight in his gaze that left no room for misunderstanding, "I want you to reflect on your actions here today. Because this isn't something I can overlook." Claire swallowed hard, her face a mix of frustration and regret. She glanced toward Maya, her expression an uneasy blend of defensiveness and shame, as though the reality of the situation was only now beginning to fully hit her. But instead of speaking, she looked away, the weight of Mr. Anderson's judgment bearing down on her. "I'll give you time to think about whether you can uphold the values we expect at this store," he said, his voice steady but unmistakably firm. "If you can't, then I'm afraid there won't be a place here for you." Maya stood in quiet disbelief, watching as Mr. Anderson's words seemed to settle around Claire like a heavy cloud. Part of her felt a sense of justice, a vindication for the mistreatment she'd endured. But there was also a lingering sadness, an awareness that the experience had revealed a truth about the world that couldn't simply be corrected with a few words. Claire's silence spoke volumes. She nodded, barely able to meet his gaze, and mumbled, "I understand, sir." With that, she turned and retreated to the back of the store, her usual air of authority replaced by a slumped posture and a face that seemed haunted by the weight of her actions. As she disappeared, Mr. Anderson turned back to Maya, his expression softening. "I want you to know, Maya, that this isn't something I take lightly. We can't change the past, but I promise you that I'm committed to making this store a place where everyone feels welcome." Maya offered a faint smile, the anger within her beginning to ease. "Thank you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But even as she accepted his apology, a part of her knew that the moment couldn't erase the hurt or the humiliation. It was a beginning, a small step toward a greater understanding, but it was far from the resolution she had hoped for. Mr. Anderson took a step back, nodding thoughtfully. "Please, take your time to look around. You're always welcome here, Maya." He offered her a small, warm smile before turning to speak to another employee. Maya lingered for a moment, her gaze drifting over the jewelry displays. She felt the eyes of a few other customers on her, but this time, their expressions held something other than judgment. There was a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of what she had endured. As she turned to leave, her mind raced with a mix of emotions, relief, vindication, but also a lingering unease. She had made her voice heard, yes, but she wondered what real changes would come from it. Would Claire truly understand the gravity of her actions? Would Mr. Anderson's words translate into lasting change? There was a tension in the air, an unspoken question that seemed to echo within her as she walked out of the store. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, a small part of a larger journey toward justice and understanding. In the quiet of the city streets, Maya took a deep breath, her heart still heavy but filled with a newfound strength. She knew that what had unfolded in the store was more than just a personal victory, it was a step toward something bigger, a moment that would lead to an impact she could only begin to imagine. But she also knew that this wasn't the end. Far from it. Days passed, and Maya's life resumed its rhythm, but her experience at Élysée lingered like a bruise that wouldn't fade. The embarrassment, the anger, it all stayed with her, a constant reminder that, no matter how many strides she'd made, the world still had barriers that seemed unbreakable. Yet, despite everything, Maya's determination remained strong. She wasn't going to let one humiliating encounter define her. Instead, it fueled a quiet fire within her, a resolve to return to that store someday, not as a timid, careful customer but as someone who could command respect. Back at Élysée Jewelers, the consequences of that day had sent ripples through the staff and management. For Claire, it felt like walking on glass. Her confidence, once so unwavering, had been shattered. The whispers and glances from her colleagues seemed endless, and she sensed the tension each time she walked into the store. Her facade had crumbled, and everyone could see it. Most of all, she feared Mr. Anderson. His words, heavy with disappointment, echoed in her mind. She knew she had crossed a line, and the fear of losing her job clung to her like a shadow. One brisk afternoon, Mr. Anderson called her into his office. Claire entered cautiously, her hands clasped tightly, fingers trembling ever so slightly. She was met with his calm, unwavering gaze as he motioned for her to sit. "Claire," he began, his tone even, yet there was an edge beneath it that made her stomach churn. "I've taken some time to think over what happened." She swallowed, nodding, her gaze fixed on a point just above his shoulder, avoiding his eyes. "I understand, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope you do," he replied, leaning back, studying her carefully. "You know, in all the years I've run this place, I've never seen something quite like this. I didn't think I'd ever need to explain the importance of treating every customer with respect." Her face flushed. I know, Mr. Anderson. I thought I was protecting the store. I thought, from what, exactly," he interrupted, his tone sharper now. "From someone who looks a certain way. Acts a certain way. Claire, this is unacceptable. You humiliated someone who had every right to be here." Claire felt her chest tighten. "I know, sir," she said, her voice strained. "I made a mistake." "A mistake," he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "Claire, this wasn't just a mistake. This was a violation of everything we stand for here. And now, because of your actions, I've made a decision." She froze, the gravity of his words settling over her like a weight. "Please, Mr. Anderson, I didn't mean for any harm. I thought I was just, your intentions are irrelevant, Claire," he interrupted, his voice firm. "What matters are the consequences of your actions." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "You've lost the privilege to represent this store, and I'm not sure there's anything left to say." Her breath hitched, panic flashing in her eyes. "Please, sir, give me another chance," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I've been here for years, and I know I can do better. Just, one more chance." Mr. Anderson's gaze softened slightly, but there was a sadness in his expression, as though he regretted the position she'd put him in. "Claire," he said quietly, "I want to believe that you can change. I want to believe that you understand the gravity of your actions. But trust isn't something that's rebuilt overnight." Claire opened her mouth to argue, but a knock on the door interrupted her. Mr. Anderson glanced over, and his expression shifted, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He nodded toward the door. "Come in," he called. The door opened, and Maya stepped inside, her presence filling the room with a quiet confidence. Claire's eyes widened, a flash of something between fear and resentment flickering across her face. Maya stood calmly, her gaze meeting Mr. Anderson's before shifting to Claire. There was a resolute calm about her, a quiet strength that held the room's attention. "Maya," Mr. Anderson said, his voice softening. Thank you for coming. She nodded, her expression unreadable. I wanted to talk, she said simply, her tone controlled but filled with an underlying intensity. Her gaze remained fixed on Claire, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Mr. Anderson gestured for Maya to sit, but she shook her head, choosing instead to stand, her posture unwavering. Claire watched her, her face pale, unsure of what to expect. Maya, I'm so sorry, she began, her voice strained with desperation. I didn't mean, don't, Maya interrupted, her voice calm but firm. Please don't pretend this was just a misunderstanding. You made a choice to treat me the way you did, and I'm here to make sure that choice isn't ignored. Claire looked down, her hands twisting in her lap, the weight of Maya's words pressing down on her. She could feel the anger and hurt behind them, and there was no defense left for her to cling to. People like you think you're just doing your job, Maya continued, her tone steady, though her words were laced with a simmering intensity. But every time you act on those assumptions, you take away something from someone else. You took away my dignity, my sense of belonging, all because you decided I didn't look like I belonged here. Mr. Anderson remained silent, his gaze moving between the two women, the tension in the room palpable. Claire's face flushed, tears gathering in her eyes as she struggled to respond. I didn't realize, Claire murmured, her voice barely a whisper. No, Maya replied, her tone sharper now, cutting through the silence like a blade. You didn't care. And that's what hurts the most. The room fell into a heavy silence, each word lingering, echoing, as Claire sat there, the reality of Maya's pain sinking in. She had thought herself justified, even righteous, but now she saw the toll her actions had taken on someone else, someone she'd hurt in ways she hadn't even understood. Mr. Anderson took a deep breath, breaking the silence. Maya, he said gently, I know this doesn't make up for what happened, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making changes here. Maya nodded, her expression softening slightly as she glanced at him. I appreciate that, Mr. Anderson. But real change doesn't come from just saying the right things. She turned her gaze back to Claire, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. It comes from understanding the impact of our actions. Claire looked up, meeting Maya's gaze, her own expression a mixture of shame and regret. She could feel the weight of everything she had done, the silent judgments she had made, the harm she had caused. And as she looked at Maya, she realized the depth of her mistake, the pain she had inflicted. Is there anything I can do? Claire whispered, her voice small, defeated. Maya's gaze softened, though there was still a steely resolve in her expression. What you can do, Claire, is learn. Take a good, hard look at yourself and ask why you felt entitled to treat me that way. And when you have an answer, make sure you never let anyone else feel the way you made me feel. Claire's face crumpled, a tear slipping down her cheek. She nodded, unable to speak, the realization of her actions finally settling in. Mr. Anderson stood, moving to Maya's side, his expression filled with gratitude and respect. Maya, thank you for your courage. And I promise you, this won't be the end of it. We're going to make sure this store becomes a place where everyone feels welcome, where dignity and respect are non-negotiable. Maya nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. She looked at him, and for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Without another word, Maya turned to leave, her head held high. As she walked out of the office, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a sense of closure that had eluded her since that day in the store. She had stood her ground, demanded respect, and in doing so, had left a mark that no one in that room would forget. For Claire, the lesson was clear, etched into her heart with a permanence that couldn't be ignored. She watched Maya walk away, and as she sat there, alone with her thoughts, she realized that her actions had consequences far beyond the walls of that store. As Maya walked out of the office, the heavy door closing softly behind her, the murmurs and glances from the employees outside seemed distant. She was too caught up in her own thoughts, too wrapped in a complex tangle of emotions that weighed on her. She felt a sense of victory, yes, but it was layered with exhaustion, a reminder that standing up for herself shouldn't have required such a battle. Each step toward the exit of Élysée Jewelers felt like shedding the tension, leaving behind the sting of judgment that had haunted her since that first humiliating encounter. Inside the office, Claire sat alone, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her fingers cold and trembling. Mr. Anderson hadn't yet dismissed her, and the silence felt like an eternity, like the world itself was suspended as she waited for his final decision. Mr. Anderson's gaze remained fixed on the door where Maya had exited. His expression was distant, thoughtful, as though he was replaying every moment, every word that had been exchanged. At last, he looked at Claire, his expression unreadable. "You know," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made her flinch, "I've seen many things in this business, but what I just witnessed. I never thought I'd see that in my own store." Claire felt her throat tighten, her words sticking in her mouth. She could barely bring herself to look at him. I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand," she whispered, her voice cracking under the strain. Mr. Anderson's gaze sharpened, his calm demeanor giving way to something sterner, colder. "Intentions mean nothing without accountability, Claire. That's what you need to understand." She nodded, her eyes stinging with the shame and humiliation that had replaced her pride. "I understand," she murmured, her voice hollow. "I was wrong. I know that now." His expression softened slightly, though his disappointment was still clear. "Maybe you do," he said quietly, "but I can't ignore what happened. You didn't just misjudge a customer, Claire. You misjudged a young woman who had every right to be here, who deserved respect from the moment she walked through those doors." Claire let out a shaky breath, feeling the weight of his words press down on her. She had never seen him this serious, this disappointed. And for the first time, she felt the true gravity of her actions, the realization that she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "But I've worked here for so long," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I've given years to this place. Can't I make it right?" Mr. Anderson's gaze softened, but his resolve remained firm. "Claire, longevity doesn't excuse behavior. Trust is built over years, yes, but it can be shattered in seconds. You've shown me, and everyone else here, something that I can't overlook." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I have to protect this store's values, and more importantly, the people who walk through our doors. And that means I can't let this go without consequences." She felt her heart sink, the finality of his words hanging in the air like a guillotine poised to fall. Desperation clawed at her, and she leaned forward, her voice cracking. "Please, Mr. Anderson. I'm begging you. I'll do anything to prove I can change." Mr. Anderson regarded her for a long, silent moment. There was a sadness in his eyes, a regret that he had to make such a decision about someone he trusted for years. But he didn't let it sway him. "Claire," he said softly, "I appreciate your willingness to change, and I truly hope you find a way to do so. But I need you to understand that the path forward may not be here." Her face crumpled, a tear slipping down her cheek. Are you saying?" He gave a single nod, his expression one of resigned sadness. "Yes, Claire. I'm letting you go. This decision wasn't made lightly, and I hope you find it in yourself to truly reflect on what happened here." Claire's hands shook as she tried to process his words. A flood of emotions washed over her, anger, regret, shame, but most of all, a hollow sense of loss. Élysée had been her life, her purpose, and now, it was slipping through her fingers, all because of a single, irrevocable mistake. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mr. Anderson nodded, his gaze kind yet unyielding. "I know you are. I just hope you carry that apology forward, that you remember what happened here and make different choices in the future." He took a breath, steadying himself. "You're dismissed, Claire." She rose slowly, her face pale, her hands clenched at her sides as she made her way to the door. Her steps were heavy, weighted down by the knowledge that she had brought this upon herself. As she walked out, the glances from her colleagues seemed sharper, cutting into her like tiny shards of glass, each one a reminder of her fall from grace. Outside, Maya had paused by the store entrance, taking a moment to gather herself before she continued down the street. She looked up, spotting Claire through the glass as she approached. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, a myriad of emotions passed between them: hurt, anger, regret, and, perhaps, a flicker of understanding. Claire stopped, feeling a surge of shame well up within her. She wanted to say something, to offer an apology that might somehow bridge the chasm between them. But the words felt empty, meaningless in the face of what she had done. All she could do was lower her gaze, unable to face the young woman she had wronged. Maya watched her, her expression unreadable, before giving a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that the situation had come to its conclusion. She turned, walking away, leaving Claire standing alone by the door. Inside, the store continued its quiet hum, employees returning to their tasks, customers browsing as if nothing had changed. But for both women, the world felt different, one carrying the weight of regret, the other the quiet strength of someone who had fought for her dignity and won. Mr. Anderson watched them both from his office window, a bittersweet smile playing on his lips. He knew that today had changed things, not just for Claire, but for everyone who had witnessed it. And as he returned to his work, he felt a renewed determination to make Élysée Jewelers a place where everyone was treated with the respect they deserved, a place where Maya's courage would be remembered as the catalyst for change. Claire made her way through the bustling city streets, each step feeling heavier than the last. The noise of the city, the blare of car horns, the chatter of pedestrians, felt distant, muffled by the weight of her thoughts. She replayed the events of the day in her mind, each moment a painful reminder of her actions and their consequences. Maya, on the other hand, walked with a newfound sense of purpose. She knew that the journey toward real change was far from over, but today, she had taken a step forward. And as she moved through the city, she felt a quiet pride, a satisfaction in knowing that she had stood her ground and demanded the respect she deserved. The echoes of their encounter would linger, a testament to the power of accountability and the strength it took to confront injustice, even in its most subtle forms. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city, both women knew that they had been irrevocably changed by the choices they had made. The story had come full circle, leaving a mark that neither of them would ever forget. As days passed, the reverberations of that fateful day in Élysée Jewelers lingered, a wound that seemed to heal slowly, leaving a scar that both Maya and Claire would carry in different ways. For Maya, there was a bittersweet sense of victory, mixed with the frustration that such a confrontation had been necessary at all. She found herself reflecting on her actions, her words, and the way they had stripped away the facade that Claire had so carefully maintained. It felt as if she had broken through a wall, exposing a hidden truth that would ripple through more than just the small world of Élysée Jewelers. Mr. Anderson, meanwhile, had not allowed Claire's dismissal to be just another incident swept under the rug. He began a campaign within the store to change the way it functioned, determined to make Élysée a place where all customers felt equally valued. New training programs were put in place, workshops were scheduled, and Mr. Anderson made sure to communicate clearly to every employee that respect and inclusion were not merely suggestions, but core values that Élysée would uphold with unwavering commitment. As for Claire, the days following her departure from Élysée were a blur of regret, shame, and, to her own surprise, reflection. It was as though, in losing the life she had carefully constructed, she had been forced to confront aspects of herself that she had long ignored or justified. The loss of her job, the pride she had taken in her years at Élysée, it all felt hollow now, stripped bare by the harsh light of her own actions. She found herself replaying Maya's words, each one a quiet, painful reminder of the harm she had caused, the biases she had allowed to shape her behavior without question. One evening, as she sat alone in her small apartment, Claire picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. She had found Maya's name in an article that detailed the incident at Élysée, a piece written by a local journalist who had taken an interest in the story. Reading it had been an experience of mixed emotions, embarrassment, anger, and, strangely enough, a hint of relief. She wasn't proud of her actions, but having them laid out so plainly had forced her to see herself through someone else's eyes. Now, as she stared at Maya's contact information, Claire felt a swell of hesitation. She had been on the verge of reaching out for days, wanting to apologize, to somehow express the regret that had settled heavily in her chest. Yet each time, she held back, uncertain if an apology would mean anything to Maya, if it would make any difference. She took a deep breath, feeling the tension rise as her thoughts raced, each one filled with doubt. Finally, with a mixture of reluctance and determination, she dialed the number, her heart pounding as the line rang. It was late, and a part of her hoped Maya wouldn't answer, that she could leave a message and avoid the inevitable discomfort of a real conversation. But just as she was about to hang up, a quiet voice answered. "Hello." Claire's breath hitched, and for a moment, she was at a loss for words. Maya's tone was calm, patient, as if she sensed the tension on the other end of the line. "Hi, Maya," Claire managed, her voice wavering. It's Claire Evans." There was a pause, and she could almost feel the shift in Maya's demeanor, a quiet intensity filling the silence. "What do you want, Claire?" Maya's tone was guarded, though not unkind. "I know this is unexpected," Claire said quickly, feeling the words rush out as though they might slip away if she didn't grasp them. I needed to talk to you. To apologize." Another silence, and then Maya's voice, steady, almost resigned. "Go ahead." Claire swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment press down on her. "I can't express enough how sorry I am for what I did," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I judged you unfairly. I assumed things about you without any right, and I realize now how much harm I caused. Losing my job was nothing compared to the regret I feel for treating you that way." Maya listened quietly, her silence both a comfort and a challenge, forcing Claire to confront her own words, to examine the sincerity behind them. "I can't ask for forgiveness," Claire continued, her voice softer. "I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to understand why I acted the way I did, and I'm committed to changing. I know that doesn't erase what happened, but," Maya's voice cut through, gentle but firm. "But you want closure." Claire hesitated, realizing the truth in Maya's words. "I suppose, yes. Maybe I do." There was a long silence, and then Maya spoke, her words careful, deliberate. "You're right, Claire. An apology doesn't erase what happened. But it's a start." Claire's shoulders sagged, a mixture of relief and sadness washing over her. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that an apology would make things right, but Maya's words were a reminder that actions had consequences, ones that couldn't simply be undone. "I appreciate that you're trying to change," Maya continued. "But understand that change isn't just about saying the right things or feeling sorry. It's about challenging yourself, every day, to confront those biases, those assumptions that led you to treat me the way you did." Claire nodded, though Maya couldn't see it. "I understand," she whispered. "Good," Maya replied, her tone softening just a fraction. "Because real change, it's a difficult road. It's uncomfortable. It requires more than just a few words over the phone." Claire felt a lump rise in her throat, a sense of gratitude mixed with the stark reality of Maya's words. She wasn't being offered absolution, she was being offered a chance to prove herself, to take responsibility for her actions and make them a catalyst for growth. "Thank you," Claire said finally, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for giving me a chance to hear that." Maya's response was quiet, almost reflective. "Claire, I didn't do this for you. I did it for myself. Because forgiveness isn't about letting someone else off the hook. It's about finding peace. Claire nodded again, a faint, bittersweet smile touching her lips. I understand. And I'm grateful. There was a pause, and then Maya's voice, soft yet firm, spoke once more. Take care, Claire. With that, the line went dead, leaving Claire alone with her thoughts, her regrets, and the faint glimmer of a path forward. She sat in silence, the words replaying in her mind, a reminder of the difficult journey that lay ahead. For Maya, the conversation had brought a sense of closure, a release from the weight she had carried since that day in the store. She knew that forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it allowed her to move forward, to let go of the anger that had lingered in her heart. It was a small step, but one that filled her with a quiet peace. The days that followed saw Maya returning to her routine, a newfound sense of purpose guiding her actions. She had faced adversity, stood up for herself, and in doing so, had carved a path toward healing, one that allowed her to carry her head high, knowing that she had fought for her dignity and respect. At Élysée, Mr. Anderson continued his efforts to reshape the store's culture, determined to make it a place where everyone felt welcome, valued. The staff, too, began to reflect on their own biases, their own assumptions, realizing that true change required not just words, but a commitment to understanding, to empathy. And Claire, now in search of a new direction, found herself confronting her own beliefs, her own judgments. The path was not easy, but she had resolved to walk it, to use her experience as a reminder of the person she didn't want to be, the person she hoped to leave behind. As the city hummed around them, life went on, each person carrying the weight of their choices, their regrets, their hopes for the future. For Maya, Claire, and Mr. Anderson, that day at Élysée Jewelers had left an indelible mark, a reminder of the power of accountability, the strength in standing up for what was right, and the difficult, yet rewarding, journey toward understanding and change. Months after that pivotal day at Élysée Jewelers, Maya's life had shifted in profound ways. Her confidence, already strong, had been bolstered by the experience, but it was more than just confidence, it was purpose. She had taken the strength gained from standing up for herself and channeled it into something greater, using her story as a catalyst for change. Maya began speaking at local community centers, schools, and events, sharing her experience to inspire others to stand up against prejudice and to foster dialogues on equality and respect. Her story resonated, drawing people in with its honesty and the courage it took to confront an entrenched injustice. What had once been a painful moment in her life had transformed into a mission to create understanding and, ultimately, unity. The experience not only shaped her personal path but also opened professional doors. Maya received an internship with a respected organization focused on social justice and equity, an opportunity that allowed her to turn her words into action, advocating for real policy changes that would prevent others from facing similar discrimination. She was no longer just a young woman navigating a world that often seemed stacked against her, she had become a voice for others who couldn't always speak up for themselves. Meanwhile, Élysée Jewelers had undergone a transformation of its own. Mr. Anderson's commitment to change had not wavered. Under his guidance, the store implemented training programs that challenged assumptions, encouraging every employee to examine their biases. The staff now worked in an environment where respect wasn't just expected, it was an integral part of the store's identity. The incident with Maya had rippled outward, reaching other branches and influencing the company's approach to customer service. Élysée became known not just for its high-end jewelry but for its inclusive, welcoming atmosphere, a place where customers of all backgrounds felt valued. And as for Claire, her journey took her down a path she had not anticipated. The loss of her position at Élysée had initially filled her with bitterness and regret. She had clung to the hope that her dismissal was temporary, that perhaps she would be invited back if she proved her remorse. But as time passed, Claire was forced to confront the deeper issues within herself, to reckon with the prejudice she had long denied. She began attending seminars and workshops on bias and empathy, not out of obligation but from a genuine desire to change. Gradually, she transformed her regret into growth, dedicating herself to understanding the experiences of those she had once looked down upon. She found work with a non-profit focused on supporting marginalized communities, a role that challenged her, humbled her, and ultimately changed her. Claire's journey was one of redemption, not a quick fix or a clean slate, but a daily commitment to becoming a better person, to undoing the harm she had caused and using her past as a guide for a better future. In an unexpected twist, her path crossed with Maya's once more at a community event. The moment was filled with a quiet tension, a mutual acknowledgement of their shared history. Claire approached Maya cautiously, her expression open, vulnerable. "Maya," she began softly, "I know I apologized before, but I need to say it again. I'll never forget what I did, and I won't stop trying to make it right." Maya looked at her, her eyes filled with a mix of understanding and resolution. She nodded, offering Claire a small smile. "I appreciate that," she replied, her tone calm but warm. "The fact that you're here, doing this work, it shows you mean it." There was a sense of closure in that moment, a mutual respect that hadn't been possible before. They weren't friends, but they were allies in a shared journey toward understanding, each woman stronger and wiser than before. As for Mr. Anderson, he watched the transformation of his store and his staff with a sense of pride tempered by humility. He knew that true change was ongoing, that it required consistent effort and a willingness to listen. He remained close to Maya, keeping her updated on the store's progress and often seeking her insights as they continued to improve. Their professional relationship became a source of inspiration for him, a reminder of the strength it took to face uncomfortable truths and to strive for a better way forward. In the end, Maya's experience became more than just a story of a confrontation at a jewelry store. It was a testament to the power of standing up, of demanding respect and change. Her courage had set off a chain reaction, transforming lives, shifting perspectives, and building bridges where there had once been walls. This story leaves us with a powerful question: how often do we look at someone and make assumptions based on nothing more than our own biases? What would happen if we took a moment to challenge those assumptions, to see people for who they truly are rather than who we expect them to be? Maya's story is a reminder that respect and dignity are rights, not privileges. It shows us that every act of courage, every stand against injustice, can spark a ripple that spreads far beyond one moment or one person. As we reflect on Maya's journey, let's ask ourselves, what role do we play in our own communities, our workplaces, and our friendships? Are we willing to hold ourselves accountable, to listen and learn when someone tells us we've fallen short? Change isn't easy, it requires vulnerability, honesty, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But if Claire's story tells us anything, it's that change is possible. It's hard, yes, but it's also rewarding, and it can open doors to a world richer in understanding and compassion. So, what would you do in Maya's shoes? Have you ever been in Claire's position, forced to face a truth you'd rather ignore? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about how we can all be a little more like Maya, brave, compassionate, and unwilling to let prejudice go unchecked. Thank you for watching, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to Tales of Twist for more powerful stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the strength within us all.